So data comes from 2 national random digital dial surveys conducted by Fact Finders, Inc. in the spring of 1996 and the spring of 1999. The samples comprised 1,905 and 2,521 adults living in 50 states. By the way, just look at the distribution, right? So you have 2,000 people, roughly, from 50 different states. So that's what, 50 from each? Less? 40 from each, right? 4 times 50 would be 200. 40 times 50 would be 2,000. Imagine taking a state of a population of millions of people and surveying 40 and considering that adequate. By the way, remember, 2.5 million defensive gun uses a year, and they surveyed a couple thousand. Even if you go by their figure, which was like 60 to 120,000 people, they surveyed a couple thousand. Their figures of defensive gun use, 60,000 to 120,000. A representative sample of defensive gun uses? I would suggest not. In any case, the samples were stratified by state with the number of interviews designated for each state determined by the state's population, relative to the total population according to the census. So more people were surveyed from more populated states. All households with a single telephone line, including those with unlisted numbers, had an equal probability of inclusion in the sample. They do that by just randomly generating phone numbers. So they capture unlisted numbers too. They're not in those days, believe it or not, pulling things out of a paper phone book. Households without a telephone were excluded from the sample. Well, I guess so. It's a telephone survey. No more than 1 adult from each household was interviewed. Rather than interview the adult who happened to be at home at the time of the call, the interviewers alternately asked to speak with a man or with a woman living in the household. If there was no adult living in the house, so they didn't survey kids. Okay. If there was no adult living in the household of the requested gender, the initial respondent was interviewed. Results. So if they couldn't find the person they want, they settled for the person their own methodology suggests was inadequate. Great. The results show unweighted data. So although they weighted survey participants by the population of the state, they unweighted them. They put them all in one bucket when they did their analysis. Once a telephone number was randomly selected, as many as 10 repeat phone calls were made until a final disposition was assigned. In 1996, 27% of contacted households refused to participate in the survey. You think that's a confounding factor? You think maybe the households that had an event where they pointed a gun at another person maybe don't want to talk about that? Maybe they never called 911 because the bad guy ran away. They don't want any police involvement. These are not questions they want to answer, so they don't participate. So you're diluting your sample for positive self-defense gun uses. In 1996, 27% of contacted households refused to participate in the survey. In 1999, 35% refused. These response rates are comparable to other self-defense gun use surveys because they're all defective in this way. Folks, a stranger calling you at home and asking, have you ever been involved in a defensive gun use that may or may not have been lawful? What kind of answer do you think you're going to get to that? You think everyone's going to volunteer? They pointed their gun at another human? It's for the same reason all dietary studies done in adult humans are garbage because people don't tell the truth about what they eat. You can give them a diary and they don't keep the diary. They fill it in at the end of the week, whatever their recollection is of what food they might have eaten. And you know they're biasing that. They're not remembering the candy bars. If they're in a dietary study, they're not going to do what they have been conditioned to believe is the socially bad thing, eating junk food. Their responses are going to be biased in favor of doing the right thing, the good thing, the thing that will make people love them, eating the healthy food. So they overstate the number of salads and they understate the gallons of ice cream. Always, every time. That is human nature. So these confounding factors are built into these surveys. Continuing now, respondents who answered yes to either gun use, I'll start again. Respondents who answered yes to either gun use qualifying question were asked up to 30 follow-up questions about the most recent event. 30 questions, folks, including an open-ended question which asked them to describe the incident. So they're getting facts from the respondent. You think those facts are accurate? You think they're truthful? You think the respondent knows the 5 elements of self-defense, so even knows what facts are relevant to provide to a judge to evaluate the legality of the use of force? All results eliminate respondents who were police officers, security guards, or military personnel. By the way, those were the people apparently most likely to be willing to participate because they were excluded, and the percentage of exclusions in this data is huge as a percentage of the total number of responses. We'll see that when we get to the tables of data. Results also eliminate cases in which the respondent reported that the event occurred more than 5 years before the survey or outside the United States. In the case of hostile gun displays, we also eliminated incidents in which the respondent refused to provide any detailed information about the event at the time of the initial interview. The respondent appeared to be an observer rather than a participant in the event, or was thought to be a criminal, for example, by the police. Well, how would you know that the respondent to your survey is thought to be a criminal by the police? You don't know who this person is. You didn't call the police and ask them, do you consider this person to be a criminal? So what does that mean? And the person who refused to provide any detailed information, maybe that's the person who's appropriately cautious about perhaps implicating themselves in unlawful conduct because they don't know what's lawful or not. Doesn't mean their conduct was unlawful. It means they don't know, and they don't want to take the risk of incriminating themselves by providing details. We were more stringent about what was counted as a hostile gun display and more permissive about what was counted as a self-defense gun use. As I'll show you, folks, they don't know what a self-defense gun use is. The judges they retained to evaluate legality of a defensive display could not have known whether or not these were defensive gun uses or not, or more accurately, more fairly to the judges, each of them applied a different legal standard. So their collective responses are meaningless. Continuing, the specific qualifying questions in both surveys were similar. Well, ideally, they would have been identical, right? In 1999, respondents were asked, in the past 5 years, has anyone used, displayed, or brought out a gun in a hostile manner against you, even if this event did not take place as part of the commission of a crime? Well, what kind of question is that? If someone displays a gun at you in a hostile way, isn't that a crime as opposed to a defensive way? And who would say they pointed a gun at me, but it was in lawful self-defense because I was robbing them? Does that make any sense? The only thing people would ever admit to is that the other person pointed the gun at them in an unlawful way, did not take part as the commission of a crime. The 1996 question did not include the against you, and so obtained more instances when the respondent was merely a witness. But I thought they excluded. Didn't they just say here? Let's see. We also eliminated incidents in which the respondent appeared to be an observer rather than a participant in the event. But now they're saying they counted people. In 1996, it didn't include the against you part of the question, so it obtained more instances when the respondent was merely a witness. So already the data is inconsistent. The collection parameters are inconsistent between the two surveys. Apples and oranges. Continuing, the 1999 survey inadvertently omitted an open-ended question about the most recent hostile gun display. 4 to 8 months after the initial interview, we tried to recontact all those who had reported a hostile gun display against them. We were able to gain a verbatim description of the most recent event from half these respondents. All right, so they bollocked their own survey. They forgot to ask the relevant question. And when they went back months later, 8 months later, only half the people would respond. In 6% of these instances, it appeared that the respondent merely witnessed the hostile gun display. In calculating the number of hostile gun displays, we thus excluded 6% of all non-contacted respondents who reported a hostile gun display. So they took the 6% from the people who did respond to the follow-up, and they just presumed that would be true of the people who did not respond to follow-up. Might there be a distinction between people willing to respond to follow-up and people not willing to respond to follow-up? Yes, another confounding factor in this study. Just from basic research methodology, we're not even to the law yet. All respondents in the 1999 survey were asked, in the past 5 years, you think people have a good memory 5 years back? In the past 5 years, have you used, displayed, or brought out a gun in self-defense to protect yourself from a person or people? The 1996 survey asked, in the past 5 years, have you used a gun to protect yourself from a person or people? You know, they mentioned the NCVS survey, and it only asked people about the prior 6 months. Why do you think that is? Why do you think they don't ask about the prior 5 years? Because people don't remember 5 years. They don't remember 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. 6 months, they might remember. Probably not. I would be very skeptical. But whatever you believe 6 months is worth, 5 years is worth nothing. In order to obtain a generous estimate of self-defense gun uses, we included incidents even when the respondent refused to give any information about the event, or from the description it appeared the other party never knew the respondent displayed the gun. Self-defense gun use incidents were summarized and sent to 5 criminal court judges from California, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. You see it highlighted in yellow? That's because now we're at the law. And this is where Attorney Andrew Branca digs in the fangs. So, self-defense gun use incidents were summarized and sent to 5 criminal court judges from California, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts who were assured anonymity. Why? Why would they need anonymity? I would evaluate these cases. I wouldn't ask for anonymity. The judges were told to assume that the respondents had a permit to own and carry the gun and had described the event on... By the way, are you required in most of the country to have a permit to own a gun? I mean, in 27 states now, you don't need a permit to carry a gun. But even in 2000, in most of the country, you didn't need a permit to simply own a gun, and had described the event honestly from his or her own perspective. The judges were then asked to give their best guess whether, based on the respondent's description of the incident, the respondent's use of the gun was very likely legal, likely legal, as likely as not legal, unlikely legal, or very unlikely legal. What option's not available here, folks? Can you spot it? Undetermined. I don't have the facts to know. How likely is it that a respondent would provide all the relevant facts necessary to do a 5 elements of self-defense analysis? That's presuming the judges knew enough to do an elements of self-defense analysis. They often don't. We don't know. We don't know what rubric these judges use to evaluate the legality of the defense of gun use because the authors of the study don't tell us. They probably don't know either. They probably just assumed it's a judge, sits in criminal court. They must know what they're doing. And all of them must be doing it the same way, even though they're from different jurisdictions. Also, even the authors concede what these judges provided the authors of this study was their best guess. It's a guess. Are we supposed to base public policy decisions on guesses of anonymous judges? A mere 5 out of the entire country, and from 3 different jurisdictions that don't apply the same legal standard for self-defense. All right, before I get to the results of this garbage study, and obviously the results of a garbage study can only be garbage, I'm going to dive into the legalities and illustrate how different the legal standards are for self-defense among these judges, and therefore how their conclusions cannot be aggregated because they're applying different tests.